Hi, folks. Have you ever noticed uh, how exhausting it can be to feel as though you always have to stay in control? Um, this is something that comes up a lot when people are trying to lose weight or generally trying to improve their health. We decide that things are going to be different this time and you're going to do things properly. So you go, okay, I'm going to eat really well. I'm going to stay active. I'm going to stick to the path. I'm going to avoid temptation. I'm going to make all the right choices. And for a while, that determination can feel very powerful. You feel really good. You feel strong about it. Yet underneath, there can sometimes be a sense that you're constantly having to keep yourself in check. You're constantly having to do the right things and check in that you are doing the right things. Now, an analogy I sometimes use is it can be like holding onto a rope. You grip tightly because you're frightened of what might happen if you let go. If you let go, perhaps you'll eat the wrong things again. You'll return to the old habits. And then because of that, all the progress you've made will disappear. So you keep gripping, you keep holding on. Now, the difficulty is that holding on requires an awful lot of effort. And that's a huge challenge, which I think people underestimate when they decide that they're going to follow a particular regime diligently. It's going to be this way. Now, most of us can manage it for a few days. Some people can't get that far, but most of us can manage it for a few days. Um, and sometimes a few weeks. And very occasionally, there are people that can make it happen for several months. But the thing is, eventually your hands get tired of gripping that rope. And then what happens is that you begin to conclude that you don't have enough determination, you don't have enough willpower, you're weak. Now, perhaps, and this is what I want you to dwell on, is the problem never was your determination. Perhaps the problem was how much effort you were using to stay in control. Now, let's change the analogy slightly and imagine if I gave you a handful of dry sand and I asked you to hold it. Now, if you allowed the sand to simply rest in your hand, most of it would probably stay there. Now, imagine becoming worried you might lose some of it. So, when you become worried you're going to lose some of it, what most of us would do would be that we start beginning to squeeze our hand more tightly. We want to keep hold of it, so we tend to tighten our grip. And what happens to the sand? But it slips through our fingers. So what happens when it slips through our fingers? Well, we think we've got to squeeze even harder. We're trying desperately to keep hold of it. But as we keep trying desperately to keep hold of it, more of it begins to escape. And the very thing you're then doing to prevent yourself from losing the sand is actually contributing to you losing more sand. Is it possible that it's exactly the same or similar to when you're trying to control getting into great shape? And this is not just about getting into great shape. This is about when you're trying to control anything that happens to yourself. You see, when you're trying to control it, when it's about discipline and about effort, food can begin to occupy a far more attention in your mind than it needs to. You start thinking about it all the time. Start thinking about what you can and can't eat. You begin to anticipate what you will and won't eat. So you're forecasting what will happen. And then when you eat the wrong thing, you're remembering all the time, going back to that time. So we worry about whether we've eaten too much. We start making these promises that will be good again tomorrow or whatever. We spend our time in our minds negotiating with ourselves. We negotiate about things like if we eat this, then we can have this. You know, if we eat this much, then that will enable us to have such and such. So even when we're making healthy choices, there can be a lot of thinking going on around them. And all that thinking is doing is creating pressure. You might recognize that feeling of pressure when you've been eating well for a week, but rather than simply enjoying how much better you feel, part of you is beginning to go, can this last? Can I keep this up? Or will it go the way it's always gone? You question whether you can keep going. So when you go out for a meal, instead of enjoying the evening and making sensible choices, you find yourself analyzing everything on the menu. Or perhaps you eat something you haven't planned to eat, and immediately you feel as though you've completely lost control. Everything's going to disappear. Um, all the effort you put in is gone. Can you relate to the fact that you're constantly on an alert to things, and that can be exhausting? So then what happens is you begin to have a desire to escape the pressure because the pressure is causing so much in you that you just want to stop controlling yourself. And at that point in time, thoughts come into your mind of, do I really need to do this? Was it so bad before? I've had enough of this. I'm just going to need a break. I'll give up and I'll go come back to it. Those things begin to come to mind. So what then happens is it feels really good to stop trying. And then say Monday arrives again and you pick up the rope again and you start gripping and you're just recreating the cycle that you've done before. The cycle's just back again. Control, pressure, tiredness, fatigue, exhaustion, oh, let go, regret, guilt, those kind of things. And then you go, oh, I'll repeat it. I'll go back to controlling again. And we're not learning. We're not learning from the cycle. We, without pressing things upon you, but we need to break the cycle. So in LightMinds, as people move through the program, they begin to discover that looking at their health doesn't have to be something that's controlled, that there's a constant battle going on within themselves. They don't stop caring about losing weight or getting into great shape. Um, People don't suddenly decide that what they want to eat and what they need to eat no longer matters. But the change is more subtle than that. What happens is they start holding on a little less tightly and they stop asking themselves, am I allowed to eat this? They begin to notice how different foods make them feel. In terms of exercise, they might believe that um, rather than having to exercise to burn calories, they begin appreciating how much better they feel when they regularly move. The body feels completely different when they're doing it. That's the feeling they like. Not isn't, and it doesn't have to be about burning calories and being disciplined about it. So instead of, you know, seeing a healthy meal as something they should eat, they begin choosing it because they want to understand and that they yeah, how it, they begin to understand and they want to understand more about what it's giving them. Now, there still can, don't get me wrong about this. I'm not talking about chaos, but so there still can be structure. There's still choices to make. You know, there's still goals that you want to achieve. You can have all of those things. The difference is the relationship you're having with those things as you have them. That's the key. It's not, I'm not saying do away with those things, far from it. Those people that come into our breakfast clubs and things like that, there's a program around it, there's a structure to everything. It's how you then go about utilizing that, using that to your advantage. So it becomes more about looking after themselves and feeling less about things being imposed upon you, and instead more about the choices that you're going to make. You know, it's something that you do naturally because you understand the value of it. You don't have to suddenly summon enormous amounts of willpower um, to do things, which you don't in other aspects of your life. For example, you don't think, oh, I've got to have huge willpower and discipline to brush my teeth in the evening. You don't do that. You don't, in the afternoon before it even happens, you don't start thinking about whether I'm going to have enough willpower tonight to brush my teeth. You don't think about that. You understand why you do it and it makes sense to you. So it simply becomes something you do to look after yourself. And that's very different from constantly trying to control your behavior. You can get to the same place gradually. It doesn't have to be forced. It doesn't have to be about effort. It happens because making those choices, those healthy choices, makes sense. You eat nourishing meals because of how they help you to feel afterwards. You become more active because you appreciate the difference of having energy, the impact that it can have on your moods. And then what happens is you live in a place of clarity. Your mind has settled down. So you notice when you become genuinely hungry, and you notice the difference from that, or when you're simply eating because it's something to do. And overall, all of these things, it doesn't have to be perfect because there's no such thing as that. In nature, it doesn't exist. There will be times when you go out and enjoy meals simply because you fancy them. There will be days when you get up in the morning and you don't fancy going to exercise. You might need to rest, and the body's telling you that. Listen. So none of those times when you eat something or you don't exercise have to frighten you. You don't have to start gripping on tighter. One meal isn't going to make any difference. One difficult day doesn't change everything. Doesn't mean you've lost control. You can simply return to looking after yourself. So lasting weight loss, lasting, sustainable weight loss can be very different from a diet. In fact, I used to say this a lot. I say it less because people really don't hear this, but everybody has a diet. We all have a particular diet. What's happened over the last 10, 15, 20 years is we've turned dieting into something that's related to weight loss. We all have a diet. Now, those weight loss regimes around dieting, that they require force, but lasting change is very different. And lasting change, what happens is you're aiming to create a diet that works for you, a food regime, a healthy eating regime, whatever you want to call it, that works for you. That takes time. That takes understanding, but it doesn't need force to do that. It doesn't need huge amounts of willpower. It needs you to allow your mind to settle down where you have less fear, less negotiation, less internal conflict, um, less forcing and effort making happen. So perhaps, for this week, just notice what's going on for yourself. Become aware, become really aware. Oh, I chose this food. Why did I do that? What was going on for me? Can I choose this food? And when you don't choose the foods that you want, it doesn't matter. Move on. Go again. Because through awareness comes insights. You will begin to shift. You just got to trust yourself to do that. Look, so many people, I spent many years in the health and fitness industry, and I used to get really frustrated with personal trainers who kind of suggest, well, not kind of suggest, they told people this is the right thing for you to be doing. And I would go, who the hell are you to tell them that? And they would go, Nick, but weight training does this, or 20 minutes of aerobic activity does this. And I say, yeah, exactly. But the thing is, you got to get the person to exercise first. So find the things that they like to exercise, like to do. Enable them to discover for themselves what works for them. You be the conduit that creates the space for them to discover these things. And then things can be fine-tuned. But until someone's gained an exercise habit, what are you talking about? What they should do. Let go of this idea that there is this the perfect way. There's no such thing. See, so if you can approach things, just see if you can let go of the need to have control all the time and just notice what happens. And when you get terrified that you're going to lose control by loosening your grip, have a check it out for yourself. Is that true? And if it's not, what happens when you loosen your grip? And then what happens when you try and tighten it again? What do you notice? What do you see differently? What do you feel differently about it? Just give it a go and see. Check it out for yourselves. Thanks very much.